I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. Thank you for being here. My name is Johnny, I'm your host. This is my video series called Down the Rabbit Hole. The reason why it's called Down the Rabbit Hole is I've been traveling down this rabbit hole for a long time. I'd say about 7 years now I've been doing this research. My research will touch upon numerous paradoxes, multiverses, time travel, false flags, certain treaties we've had in the past with, so to speak, aliens, as you would know them. Also, certain laws that we have in this country, but some of those will be in later videos. This video, I would like to touch upon the Mandela effect and the Berenstain Bears paradox. Those of us who know who Nelson Mandela is, or was, God rest his soul, he was a gentleman that was jailed in South Africa for well over 20 years, and it was during a very racist regime of South Africa. Now, the Mandela effect is something that it just doesn't stick with Mandela. It's numerous paradoxes that people have stumbled across. Now, the base Mandela effect was Mandela was in prison. He was released in the 90s, as we all know. But some folks say that's not true. Mandela died in prison in the 80s and he never made it out of prison. I've actually done a poll on this and numerous people have agreed with me. We all remember Mandela getting out of prison, living the rest of his days out in South Africa and doing his thing, so to speak. But there are a number of people I've asked about this, and they've said, no, that's not true. Mandela died in the late 80s in prison. Now, that goes with a few other things, like the Berenstain Bears. MIT did a study and put out a report on the Berenstain Bears paradox, similar to the Mandela paradox, or the Mandela effect, as some would call it. Now, the Berenstain Bears, all of us grew up with that. I'm an 80s baby. I was born in 1982. And I grew up with the whole set of Berenstain Bears books. But MIT found that the Berenstain Bears were not just known as the Berenstain Bears. They pulled and did this study of people, most of which were saying it's the Berenstain Bears. Now, I've done the same thing. For those of you who know nothing about MIT, it's one of the most prestigious technology schools and sciences schools in the nation. When they did this study, they found that some people were saying, no, it's Berenstain. My own study was of family and friends. And the people I asked in my circle, which is fairly small, but one of the realest circles I've ever been part of, have all said Berenstain. Berenstain Bears. And I myself remember this because I read these books as a kid from the time I was about 5 years old right up until I would say in 4th grade or so. My mother instilled reading was important, and I held true to that. Every night as a little kid I would read one or two of these books, and I remember them as Berenstain. Now you have people saying it's the Berenstain Bears. What causes something like this? This is the whole point of these videos, to help folks realize what's going on around us. It's not to tell you what to think, it's to help you draw your own conclusions. Now, we can argue tomatoes, stuff like that when it comes to the Bears. But it's not just the Bears or Mandela. Most of us grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. A lot of people out there now are saying it wasn't how he said it. A lot of us remember, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Was it a beautiful day in the neighborhood? Some folks say it was a beautiful day in this neighborhood. Those of us who grew up in the 80s watching this show remember him saying, "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." Well, I've come across a number of people, I'd say about 6 or so now, that say it was a beautiful day in this neighborhood. Well, I'm not entirely convinced. Some of us can say, well, everybody's memories are different. Some of us say, well, you must be smoking something right now. Mind you, I don't smoke tobacco. I smoke the vapor. I don't smoke pot. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. Alright? So you can't say I'm smoking something crazy. You can't say I'm drunk. Alright? Hand to the Creator, whoever he or she may be, I don't do drugs. And these instances I'm going to touch on. So think for yourself, what was it? Was it it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood? Or was it a beautiful day in this neighborhood? Another one, I call it the Forrest Gump paradox. The most famous saying from that movie. Mama always said, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Well, this new paradox that has come about shows him in the movie saying, life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And that's kind of nerve-wracking in a way, because we all grew up quoting this. Life is like a box of chocolates. Every one of us has quoted that saying at least a dozen times since the 90s. Okay? Now, you think about it logically. What would cause something like this? Because it is a paradox, whether it be a glitch in the matrix or our own memories. It is a paradox of sorts. Because you have so many people saying one thing, and then the same people are just baffled by hearing what he says in the movie. Now, I've watched this movie at least 100 times in my life. At least. Probably more. And I always remembered it. Life is like a box of chocolates. Now, in saying all this, I'm going to touch on something that not many people know about and that I really stumbled across. I'm not going to say what I have done because that's an omission by the law and I could probably get arrested for it and tried. But fuck them. That's what I say. I'm going to be blunt and bold. Don't excuse my language, but this is not for someone under 18. There was a project back in the day called Project Pegasus. Not many people know about this. It took place on Montauk. It's a military base out in Montauk, Long Island. And it was a time travel experiment. Now, in order to power the time stream, I guess we could call it, for lack of a better phrase, they needed Tesla coils. Anybody who knows anything about Tesla coils, Tesla would have changed energy as we know it in energy production. These coils ran off the Earth's energy and the gravitational field. And it was a renewable energy, an unlimited energy. So in order to power these machines, they used Tesla coils. And they started sending people back in time. Somewhere along the lines of sending people back in time, something happened. Whether it was a rip in time during time travel to the past, or whether the few people they sent to the future caused this paradox. And this is what I'd like to talk about. Because life isn't what we know it anymore. We know that the Bernstein Bears existed. But some folks say, no, that's not true. We know about what Forrest Gump said, what Mr. Rogers sang, where Nelson Mandela ended up after prison. What would cause this? And that's what I'm going to touch on, because it's kind of like quantum physics in a way. It's a rip in time. And when you have a rip in time, you can cause sort of a vergence or divergence of multiple parallel universes into one. So, in our universe, as we remember it, it's the Berenstain Bears. But here's our universe, here's the one next to us. They're the Berenstain Bears. Somehow that came into play in our timeline. You can call me crazy, call me a kook, but I've done my research, I've done my damn thing with this. And this is why I'm here, to help some of you who don't understand it actually grasp the concept of this, that it is possible. Time travel has been possible since the early days of World War II, being the Nazis were the first ones to start this veritable time travel type of experiment. They used to send young, very fit, virile Nazi brown shirts, young soldiers, downstream, as they called it. They'd send them through a plasma stream, right downstream. They'd have objectives. Pick up a rock, pick up a leaf, pick up a stick. We want to see how far back you went. And the problem with this was certain brown shirts that came back would literally go absolutely off the walls batshit crazy, whether it be from traveling down the plasma field downstream or whether the radiation got to them and caused them to go insane. But most of these men were killed right in the laboratories because they were about to kill everybody in there and destroy what work they were working on. So we see this happen right up until the end of the war. The end of the war happens, we absorb many, many high-ranking officials in the science departments of the Nazis. Oppenheimer being one, Wernher von Braun being another. Pretty much the fathers of NASA. The fathers of modern rocketry. But they also worked on the time travel experiments then. There was a man by the name of Andrew Basiago from Washington State. He was actually a well-known, well-respected lawyer for a long time, many years. Now, I don't know if people consider him a kook now, a loon, whatever you want to call it, someone who belongs in a padded room. But I feel he argues a perfect point on time travel. Back in the late 60s, during Project Pegasus, they sent him back in time. And it kept going until the early 70s. He and his father were both on this project. Now, one instance he traveled back in time to the Gettysburg Address and was able to see Lincoln himself give the Gettysburg Address. He talks about this. And as the experiment went on, they decided, hey, let's try and send someone forward into the future. And this is where the parallel universes tend to verge and to tear in time. Time, space, reality. It's starting to merge. It's been merging for quite some time. Part of that is because we keep fucking with the timeline. So, Project Pegasus sent him to the future. Now, to give you an idea who ran this project, it was Rumsfeld and Cheney were the heads of this project. And they coincided with the Department of Defense and the CIA. Now, when they were doing this, they decided to send him back in time. And then they decided to send them forward in time. Too much fucking around, in my opinion. When they sent him ahead in time, now here's the crazy thing, and I'm going to quote him. He said he witnessed 9/11 happening. Now, for all we know, in our actual timeline, what we perceive as reality, as a whole, for us, our lives, our universe, 9/11 never happens. Just as an example, before you start going batshit crazy and calling me a jackass and every other name in the book, saying I need a padded room, let the white shirts take care of you, think about it. Nothing is too far-fetched. Nothing is ever out of credibility to a certain point. Project Pegasus witnessed this, but I feel it was a parallel universe, because when he traveled forth in time, it was 30 years he went ahead, from 1971 to 2001. Now, whether you think that it's real or bullshit, I beckon you to do your own research on this. I have done a lot of research myself. Time travel is real. There are instances of said experiments going on with our government and the sciences departments of our government. And what I found was people have gone back in time. Like, I believe it was the Grand Forks Bridge in Vancouver, Canada, or somewhere in British Columbia, Canada. We'll just say British Columbia, Canada. There are two gentlemen, all right? Now, this is 1943, I believe it was. There's one gentleman that really sticks out, and he had a modern camera. Now, by modern, I mean it was around maybe the 70s or so, it looked. But something really stood out with him. Nobody else was wearing sunglasses, and they didn't have sunglasses like this in those days. The sunglasses he was wearing were more modern than the day. And this cardigan he was wearing over his silkscreen printed t-shirt. This t-shirt, silkscreen printing, was not created until the 60s for t-shirts. So this gentleman looks really out of place. Now, I say two gentlemen in this video, and in this picture I should say, because there's another gentleman that supposedly went back in time to, I believe it was 2003, this gentleman, by the last name of Carlson. Mr. Carlson got brought in by the feds for what they thought was insider trading. This guy placed money in the stock market and got greedy. And he placed the money on stocks that weren't supposed to pan out, at least being known to the public they weren't going to pop. So they thought he had some insider information. This gentleman is seen, a few people up in the video. So Mr. Silkscreen is here, Mr. Carlson is up here in the picture. Mr. Carlson is definitely in the same picture as the time-traveling hipster, as I call him, and as he's been dubbed by other YouTube channels. They have a mugshot of Mr. Carlson. They spoke with Mr. Carlson, and he was adamant about being a time traveler. So he got out on bail. They went to go back to find him and question him some more on the matter, and he had just disappeared. Now, whether he was connected with the mafia or some dark entity, I'm not ruling that out. They made him disappear because the feds talked to him, and whoever was involved didn't want to get caught. That's one instance. But how did he know? There were stockbrokers that said, we didn't even see this happening. We did not see these stocks going the way they went. And this guy made millions overnight. His original plan was to make only maybe a few $100,000. Not millions. Greed overtook Mr. Carlson. Okay? So, with time travel, it's a slippery slope. Some folks have asked me, well, why doesn't someone just go back in time and stop Hitler? Why doesn't someone go back in time and save Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy? Okay? These parts of the historic timeline are key to keeping the timeline intact. They were supposed to happen. Now, whether Bobby was supposed to be killed or JFK was supposed to be killed, nobody can really even argue whether we can save them or not. Think about it this way. If you go back in time and save Kennedy, you're being brought in by the Secret Service, the feds, you're being questioned, maybe tortured because we didn't have the same laws protecting us at that time from the law enforcement officials. If you got arrested by a Chicago cop or a Boston cop or a New York cop or even an LA cop, and they were questioning you in a matter that you were innocent in, they would beat the shit out of you, literally use their fists to get a confession out of you. And the reason why you would confess to a crime you didn't commit is because you were tired of getting beat. That's a possibility of what would happen. Someone's going to shoot Kennedy. Well, how do you know this? You can't tell them you're a time traveler from the future. That's what you learned in the history books. You can't say that. They'll lock you in an asylum, a sanitarium, or worse, just beat the hell out of you to find out. And even then, they won't believe you if you keep saying, I'm a time traveler. Now, when Kennedy was shot, there was one thing I found. And a lot of people really don't know this at all. Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. Oswald was an average rifleman in the Corps, the United States Marine Corps. Average. But you're taught, as a rifleman, to not expose where you are if you're going to do something like, say, post up in a sniper perch like that. He would not expose the barrel of his gun. And what they found in Oswald's rifle were Full Metal jackets. Full Metal jacket would have passed right through him. So the shot that really killed Kennedy and caught him in the head was more so like a hollow point. Okay? And after doing more and more research on this, the stuff I will not omit or admit to, I found a picture that was confiscated by the U.S. government of Oswald standing street level in the doorway of the book depository when Kennedy was shot and killed. That's right. I said it. He was not where they said he was. So how did Oswald kill Kennedy from multiple stories up when he was on street level? These are things you need to open your eyes about. Question everything they tell you. What they tell us in the history books and in history class, some of it is true, yes. But the rest of it is total bullshit. And it's to indoctrinate you how to think. Now, I consider myself woke. I have numerous people that I work with that are very woke. And they've taught me some things that I really just don't want to talk about with you folks. Because in the deep state's eyes, it's an admission of guilt. But I am not guilty. I am just someone who's woke and tired of the bullshit. Now, in my next video, I'll talk more about time travel and Kennedy and so on and so forth. But for right now, think for yourselves. Do the research. If you can travel down the rabbit hole like I have, fine. If you're too scared, keep coming back. I'll tell you more. But I appreciate your time, folks. And this is all for now.